Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. I'm Mario Sikora here with the TJs, TJ Dawe and TJ Ingrassia. We are talking about the Transmitting Seven. And you know what? I'm going to turn it over to you, TJ Dawe, to talk about what movie we're going to discuss and why.
We're going to talk about the character of Harley Quinn, played by Margot Robbie, who is the lead role in Birds of Prey, with its sometimes used subtitle, The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn.
Yeah. And we need to go no further determining whether or not this is a Transmitting Seven movie, given the subtitle, right? So before TJ, I ask you to do the summary of or the synopsis of the movie. TJ Ingrassia, any history with this movie?
I had seen it before. I'm trying to remember. It's been maybe a year ago I'd seen it, give or take. Really enjoyed it, and definitely enjoyed watching again for this film. And then I also got to watch The Suicide Squad, sort of on accident, which I'll let you explain.
Yeah, so for our listeners, we were going to record this last week, but I watched the wrong movie. So I rewatched The Suicide Squad when these guys watched this movie, which I had never seen. So, in fact, I really didn't even know it existed. I'd kind of heard, the phrase bird of prey, but I don't know, just didn't occur to me what it actually was, at least as far as Harley Quinn was concerned. TJ Dawe, tell us more about the movie, please.
Yeah, so this came out, I think, in February of 2020. And I remember this vividly because I was living in LA at the time. I'd started a job there and I was paying close attention to what was in the theaters. I was working in the entertainment industry. And then not too long after that, lockdown happened. So movie theaters got shut down, or at least temporarily closed, and the movie kind of fell into obscurity. And a lot like The Suicide Squad, which came out a year later, when things hadn't fully reopened, I don't think either of them made that much money or had that much cultural impact. And that's a shame. I think they're both really fun, bright, enjoyable movies that are a breath of fresh air, as a contrast to how self-important superhero movies have become.
Yeah.
This is just like, let's have a good time. Let's not pretend this is realistic. This is a comic book.
Yeah, and they both start off that way, right? Just like this is meant to be fun, right? It's I'll say silly, but I don't know, smart silly, right? Enjoyable silly. And one of the things I really liked about this, and then I'll ask you to do the synopsis, but it treats Harley Quinn, as a likable, admirable, in a sense, scamp. She's clearly, she's clearly somebody who gets into lots of trouble, right, and makes enemies along the way, which is one of the plot points, right? But she's endearing and lovable in the way that so many sevens are. So, with that in mind, TJ, tell us what this movie's about.
Yeah, so we focus on Harley Quinn, whose original name was Dr. Harleen Quinzel, played by Margot Robbie. She's a career criminal, and until right before the events of Birds of Prey, she was the girlfriend to the Joker. So, distraught from the breakup, she blows up the chemical factory where she cemented her devotion to Mr. J, as she calls him. And word of the breakup gets out in the criminal world, and criminals of all kinds come looking for her for past wrongs she has perpetrated against them, the vast majority of which she does not even remember. In particular, there's a gangster called Roman Sionis, played by Ewan McGregor. He goes by the name The Black Mask, who makes a deal with her that if she recovers a diamond that contains the codes to a lost mafia fortune, he'll make sure that no one messes with her again. So she raids a police station and facilitates the escape of Cassandra Cain, who's a young pickpocket who took the diamond in question and swallowed it. And then she figures out that Sionis' offer is really just a setup. He plans to kill them both, whatever it takes to get that diamond back. So she teams up with the Huntress, a vigilante played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and then vigilante and singer and criminal Dinah Lance, played by Journey Smollett Bell, who also goes by Black Canary, and Renee Montoya, played by Rosie Perez, who's a cop, an idealistic cop. And they set aside their differences, and they kick the asses of the army of criminals that Sionis has sent in to kill them. all wearing masks and colorful costumes for a reason that I don't believe is ever explained. And in the end, Harley Quinn kills the bad guy and goes her own way with Cassandra Cain, and the other three women team up to become the crime-fighting trio, the Birds of Prey, certain to be the stars of a succession of movies that never ended up happening.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah, wow. And there are so many little nuggets inside of this movie, right? I mean, so many little relationships, so many little quirks. You know, her pet hyena, for example, and you know how that all develops. Her fondness for breakfast sandwiches with Armenian arm hair in them, and you know, and on and on. So it's really just a chock full movie. TJ Ingrassia, what was seven-ish about this movie from your perspective?
Every single frame from start to finish. So last episode we talked about Pride and Prejudice and the Navigating Seven, and we spent a lot of time talking about the nuances of that character, and there's some subtlety, and it doesn't, you know, it's not the classic stereotype of an exuberant seven, but it is very sevenish. This film is, and Harley Quinn, Margot Robbie's portrayal, is the most caricatured stereotype of a seven that you could possibly imagine, in the best way.
Right.
Now, obviously, very few human beings probably have ever acted the way that Harley Quinn does, but it's just so seven-ish.
Yeah.
The opening sequence is an animated deal where Harley's explaining her childhood and sort of her backstory. She's
starting from the very moment of inception. By the way,
yeah. She says, too early? Oh. So she's abandoned by her father, but she keeps coming back. He dumps her at this church with these abusive nuns, but she gets good grades and fights back. She keeps having her heart broken, but she keeps searching for love. So the first note that I wrote is irrepressible spirit. Nothing gets this girl down. She keeps going. She keeps having fun. She keeps getting herself into all sorts of trouble. But she's just so much fun. One sort of cliche about sevens is that their lifestyle or philosophy is ready, fire, aim, you know. I'm very much a ready, study, aim, study some more, then maybe fire. Well, Harley's not even that.
No,
she's just fire. There's no ready, there's no aim.
Yeah.
Instant thought, instant action.
I get my best ideas when I'm drunk, right? Which is one of the lines, right? So
yeah.
It's that impulsiveness that, without inhibition.
Yeah.
Great.
And I think being sort of a one who's very concerned about following the rules and making the right moves and doing the right thing, I can sort of live vicariously through Harley in this film. It's a fun outlet for me to see someone do, obviously over the top and exaggerated, but still fun in a way that sometimes it's like, oh, I wish I could do that. Yeah. Just everything about this movie is seven-ish.
Yeah. Great. TJ Dawe, what would you add to that?
Well, just something we have talked about on this podcast before is the relationship between types 1 and 7. And I can imagine a 1 having one of two very different reactions to such a character. One is, like you described, delight, living vicariously through them, imagining what it would be like to have such freedom, such inhibition, and to land on one's feet again and again. The other reaction, which is often where we see ones in movies, although not in this one, stern disapproval, hatred. How could somebody be so irresponsible? How could they live like that? How could they not think about the consequences? Do they only care about themselves? Harumph. So, good on you.
Well, okay, but let me say this, add this caveat. I do know some transmitting sevens in real life, and that is much more, it's much easier to be endeared toward a character in a film. It's in a box, it's safe, it's not real, we're all just pretending. But when you're dealing with the transmitting seven in real life, for a 1, that can be a little more difficult.
It would be interesting if those transmitting ones in your real life looked like Margot Robbie, if there would be a bit more flexibility, perhaps, right? So,
I should be so lucky.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
TJ Dawe, anything else? Go ahead.
Here's my heading. So I got a lot of examples because I completely agree with TJ Ingrassia. This movie is A treasure chest of sevenness. So I'll just read the headings before I go into any of the detail. Savoring.
Yeah.
Fun and pleasure seeking. Suppressing sadness. Distractibility. Resilience. Quick thinking. Optimism. And under stress, selfishness. So let me quickly dive into the specifics on a few of those. Savoring. You mentioned earlier the breakfast sandwich. That is not something to be glossed over. She rhapsodizes about the breakfast sandwich that she loves from a gas station. And she describes every ingredient. And then when it gets knocked out of her hand, she is devastated. And the button at the end of the movie is that she finally gets another breakfast sandwich and eats it, and gets one for Cassandra and looks at the camera and winks. That's savoring, very Sevenish of like, isn't life delicious? Look at the great abundance that there is. And she can see it in something that's otherwise thought of as maybe trashy food. Fun and pleasure seeking. There's a scene when she's hanging out with Cassandra in her apartment, and they're watching Looney Tunes cartoons, and she's feeding her pet hyena licorice, and they eat cereal and they laugh. Similarly, right as we're nearing the climax of the movie, she's getting ready for a big battle, which will involve a lot of mayhem and death with the other women, and she says, "Isn't this fun? It's just like a sleepover. We should order pizza." And to enter the battle, she goes down a big slide and she's laughing. And after the final battle, she brings a tray of margaritas to the other women. Hey, we just cheated death. We just saved the bad guy. Suppressing sadness. So this is early in the movie. She's, as she mentions in the backstory, she broke up recently with Mr. J, so she's very sad. And what does she do with that sadness? She parties. She participates in a roller derby and kicks ass. She pounds shots at a bar. She pole dances. She breaks some guy's legs when he lips her off. She does drugs. She talks to a mannequin head. She dances. She pukes in someone's purse. She gets a tray of drinks for what she thought were her friends. She gets betrayed by one of her only allies, the guy who runs the Chinese restaurant beneath her apartment. And she's really sad. And there's this moment where you see she's hurt because there's a big reward out for her, and he chooses to go with that instead of saving her. There's a few flashes where you see tears in her eyes, which I think is a really great illustration of something we have talked about, is that a stereotypical rendition of sevens is that they don't experience sadness. Oh, they do. It's there. It's just what makes them a seven is, what do you do with that? Move on or try and fun the sadness away? She's incredibly distractible. So while she's running from the cops in one scene, she notices a sparkly fanny pack. And she's running through a vendor market. When she's being threatened by this huge guy, Mr. Happy Tattoos, she picks up a penny right as he's about to clobber her, which results in him getting an arrow in the neck. While tied up by a gangster who plans to kill her, he slaps her, and then she goes into this elaborate fantasy where she's the Marilyn Monroe character doing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. Quick thinking comes in a lot. There's a number of scenes where, very much like a cartoon character, and she originated in a cartoon, not the comic books. She was so popular, she became a character in the comic books and now in the movies. There's a number of scenes where she takes on multiple attackers at once. And this is not some carefully choreographed thing. It's presented in real life, of course, it's carefully choreographed, but it's presented as in she's just shucking and jiving and using whatever's around her. Where are you standing? Where are you standing? What vehicles are in motion? What items can I fix? What weapons do I have? Let's use all of those things. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, suddenly everybody's dead. And at the climax, one of her allies, Black Canary, is the only character that we witness in this whole movie who has superpowers. This is very much in the Batman branch of the DC universe, so it's all gangsters and vigilantes who don't have superpowers and cops, the one exception being Black Canary, who can put out this supersonic yell that causes people to fall backwards. At this point, Harley Quinn has somehow acquired and donned a set of roller skates, and she steps...
When did she have time for a costume change? Is what one of the characters says, yeah.
Exactly. She's as unpredictable and as free of actual physical limits as a Looney Tunes character. So Black Canary bellows out her superpowered yell, and Harley Quinn positions herself right in front of it and uses it to propel her on her roller skates to catch the car where the gangster is making his giveaway. In the face of overwhelming odds, as the army's coming in, she's the only one who's optimistic. She's the one who's talking the other women into like, I think we can do this. I think we can get out of this. And lo and behold, she turns out to be right. And at her lowest point in the movie, she sells out Cassandra Cain, the teenage pickpocket she has taken under her wing. She eventually repents of having done this and makes restitution to her. But in that moment, it's like, sorry, I'm just going to take care of myself. That's that.
Yeah. All great Seven examples from both of you. I've got a couple of quick things I'll add here. Number one, and you've both kind of touched on this, but it's this tendency to reframe things, right? Just, everything around me is awful, but I'm putting the best face on it. Even when she talks about her father, leaving her. Well, I kept finding him, and and when she goes to the orphanage, it's, well, I didn't really fit in, as she's getting beat by the by the nun, that sort of thing. So always looking at the bright side, always putting the best possible spin on whatever it is that's happening. You talked about the distractibility was clearly there, even to the point where anybody who has ever lived with a Seven will understand this phenomenon where you kind of join them halfway through the conversation, right? When she's rhapsodizing about the breakfast sandwich, it's all a an overdub or a voiceover that's happening, and then she turns to the guy who cooked it and says, "I really mean it, Sal," or whatever his name was, and he's kind of like, "What are you talking about?" Right? And this is something that Sevens will do. They'll be having this conversation in their head, and then they'll bring you in halfway through as if you're supposed to know just what on earth they're talking about, right? Which can be an interesting phenomenon. There was also even though she was very selfish, right? As you said, she turned on people and, was always kind of looking out for herself. She was a real pleaser as well, right? I mean, she wanted people to be happy. And now, of course, if their happiness contradicted with hers or conflicted with hers, she would always go with hers. But she really did have this kind of kindness and goodwill toward people in general. I mean, not the guy whose leg she broke or, some of those other, the guy whose face she had tattooed on a bet, or anything like that. But, in general, you see this kind of, I don't know, good-intentioned character for the most part. And even when she's being a little bit devilish, it's hard to kind of hold her accountable for it.
Yeah, she's not being malicious when she's doing those things. It's more just like she's overwhelmed with the fun possibility of jumping on this guy's legs or tattooing the face. It's nothing personal necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't make him do it. I just dared him.
And he did lip her off.
Also,
she didn't just target that guy.
Exactly. Right. He wasn't just an innocent bystander there. There was also one of the things I liked about this portrayal is that she was pretty smart, right? I mean, you wouldn't have guessed that she was a PhD, going into this. If you look at most of what's happening, you wouldn't think that this is a really intelligent person. But she was, she started off as the Joker's psychiatrist, I think, right? I think that was the plot point. Now, a psychiatrist has to be an MD, and she said she was a PhD, but that's a little niggling point here. We won't get too caught up in here and ruin the fun. But there were times when she'll just stop and make these very incisive diagnoses to, about people, right? Using those, psychological insights that she had. And there was even the part where she talked about being kind of the brains behind the Joker's best capers, right? So she was a smart person, even if you may not have picked that up right away. And that's something I find with a lot of Sevens. And one of my frustrations with the literature of the Sevens is it says that, often portrays them as superficial and, kind of shallow and not people who will go deep into something. So I really love that they portrayed the character as somebody who was smart and insightful, underneath all the chaos.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Mary, or both of you, is that Sevens they're a head type. And so, when people think about head, heart, gut for the Enneagram, the head, when you think of the head type, you go immediately to thinking about fives as the stereotype. And as you said, sevens get overlooked. So I guess talk more about that in terms of how that plays out with sevens in general.
Yeah, so this is further reason why I dismiss most of this head types, heart types, belly types, right? Because you look at this character, and so what does it mean to be a head type? Okay, well, they're thoughtful and think a lot, and, et cetera. And then there are these distortions people put onto it, like, well, they don't think that well, or, whatever. Look, Harley Quinn was thoughtful. She was emotional, right? There's huge heart throughout this character, and she was pretty darn action oriented. I mean, she was always up to something. So I think this head, heart, belly thing is a real convenience that can be confirmation biased our way into, but pretty easily left aside once you start looking at the reality of human nature.
Mm-hmm. Is there do you have an awareness to action sort of, you use different language to describe it, or do you think basically top to bottom it's just a complete misunderstanding of each of those three types?
Look, it's clear that, to some extent, we could say that sevens and sixes or fives are probably a little bit more in their head than, some others. They might, let the head go, spinning and so forth. But, raise your hand if your head doesn't go spinning, right? If you're not always, having conversations with yourself and, that sort of thing. And I don't know, is there something, more embodied about eights, for example, or nines or ones? I don't know. Maybe, the way I like to look at it is, look, we're all creatures who, we have feelings, right? Sensations. We have emotions. We have thoughts. We take action. And each of us kind of have a different relationship with those that can be useful to look at within the context of our personality style. I mean, you can look at me as an 8. Look, I'm a fairly heady person, in a lot of ways, but and I'm pretty action-oriented, and I'm pretty decisive, and all these things. And it would be hard to argue I'm particularly emotional unless you factor in anger, and then I'm as emotional as anybody else, right? So, I don't know. These things, for me, it's something that, okay, worth looking into, but it adds a whole lot of buts, right? And what abouts that may not really make it worth something focusing too much on, in my view.
There's a lot of other aspects that are much more concrete that are worth focusing on first.
Agreed. But again, of course, we all think, we all feel, we all do. We all have emotions. Worth looking at. That's human nature.
One thing I'll throw in from my experience working in theater is I have found, and of course my sample size is very limited, but I would gamble that this would play out if somebody were to do a massive study somehow. The world of improv comedy is loaded with sevens. And as far as how a seven's mind works, the short answer to that is quickly. And one of the things that draws sevens to improv is, first of all, little to no prep. And then secondly, it's like, take an idea, say yes, and go with it. And something Bob Odenkirk said is that college campuses are full of sketch and improv troupes. And the reason is that at that age, our brains haven't fully developed. And in sketch and improv, you're creating a whole world that lasts just a few minutes, and then that's it, it's done. Moving on, next sketch, whether it's written or improvised. So I think that's really appealing to a lot of sevens is, what's the prompt? Give me a location, or give me the rules of the game, or give me a costume piece. I will run with it, I will go. And that's something Robin Williams used to do in his stand-up comedy, and it's something Jonathan Winters, who was one of Robin Williams' heroes, used to do, is he would be a guest on the equivalent of The Tonight Show, or maybe, I think it literally was The Tonight Show with Jack Parr. He would find a prop backstage and then devise a character based on that prop and then come on and just be that character for the interview. This is a major platform for a comedian to have. You can come on with no prep whatsoever and knock it out of the park time after time after time. And that, to me, is a seven's head in action, writ large.
Yeah, look, sevens are striving to feel excited, right? And so they're constantly looking for stimulation, whether that is through thinking about it. I mean, that's the easiest way to get stimulation, right? Is to think about things that are stimulating. And so that, it trains that. Now, again, you know way more about these things than I do, but I also know that Robin Williams, although he often seemed, and there was a lot of in the moment creativity, he was doing a lot of practicing in the background, right? I mean, he had a lot of stuff in his pocket that would come out and that he would use. And it's kind of like a jazz musician who, is constantly practicing scales, constantly practicing bits, constantly practicing arrangements and stuff, so that, when it comes time to improvise, they have this huge toolkit. Okay, so I'm sure Jonathan Winters, who was a genius, right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember when he was in real time, and he was absolutely a genius. And I'm guaranteeing you, he was always, always, always practicing something or looking for ways to enhance that in-the-moment creativity.
Yeah, Robin Williams, there's many stories of him entertaining the extras when he's on a film shoot. Did not have to. He just loved doing it, or entertaining whoever was driving him. Or a friend of mine was an extra in the movie Insomnia, which filmed on Vancouver Island. And he waited and greeted every extra as they left the set personally. He also famously would just go to comedy clubs wherever he was filming and stand at the back and watch everybody set and then come on last. And there were a number of comedians who refused to perform if he was in the audience because he would absorb their material and then inadvertently repeat it on The Tonight Show, and suddenly, oh great, I can't use my closer anymore because now everybody thinks I stole from Robin Williams. But he was just this tornado of activity, and you're right, he was just constantly absorbing, so that's all just in there. So the smorgasbord when he's performing is, what do I want to say about what topic? Am I, oh yeah, I know something about that, boom, and then it just comes out, probably with no malicious intent, no thought of like, I'm going to steal from that local comedian. It's just like, it's just a thought that's there.
Yeah. And that's often the creative, the creative act is to take sort of found things or unconnected things and come up with a novel way of connecting them and a novel way of presenting them, that nobody else would have thought to do. Right. So, and the more you spend your time searching for those things, the more creative you're probably going to be. So, yeah. All right. Great stuff. So, let's move on to what's transmitting about this character. And again, to your earlier point, TJ, about every frame of the movie, again, holy cow. I mean, there's, little in this that is not transmitting. But I'm going to let you guys take it. So TJ Dawe, why don't you take this one first? What was transmitting about Harley Quinn?
Well, Harley Quinn, unsurprisingly, given the genre she's in and her origins as a character, has a larger-than-life appearance. So her makeup, her hair, her outfit. There's a scene when she does a raid on a police station, and her weapon of choice is a shotgun that shoots beanbags and glitter bombs.
A fun gun.
Within that scene, she finds a baseball bat in the evidence locker. Her weapon of choice in the comics and cartoons is an oversized mallet. So for the final battle, she somehow finds one of those in the environment where they're having their battle. And as we mentioned, the roller skates. She just puts on roller skates for no particular reason, no indication where she got them from. They're lace-up skates. It would take a while to put them on. She just does it, boom, because it's fun. So she pops. Transmitter, we've talked about this before. Transmitters don't always, but sometimes have an appearance that you can see from across not only a room, but across a gymnasium. It's like, whoa, look at that person, and that's no accident.
Right. And that's certainly Harley. I mean, just everything about her sparkled and shimmered and popped, right? So, TJ Ingrassia, anything you'd add to that?
I would say she's constantly talking. Yeah. If she's not talking out loud, we are hearing her talk in voiceovers. There's barely a second she's on screen, which is most of the movie, when her mouth is not open and just whatever is coming out randomly.
Right. Yeah, for sure, right? Just, constantly talking, constantly expressing. the sparkle. I mean, just drawn to the sparkle. TJ, you made the reference to the bag. You know, she's running, I mean, literally running from her life, from the police and everything. And then she sees this bag hanging there, and she just and she just glows for a moment, right? She just, all of a sudden, she's transported to this place because of the bling, you know, and sparkle related to this bag. And then she grabs it, wraps around herself, and starts running again. There's also a good, again, it's a great example of the pattern of expression. Okay, she's not really that tuned in to other people and, you know, their needs and what's going on around them, right? There's even this kind of ongoing thing where all these people that are out to kill her for reasons she just can't remember, right? Some of them she doesn't even know who they are. It's like, oh, I'm not sure what I did to this guy. Some of them she knows, and she even says at one point, you know, boy, I just didn't realize how many people wanted to kill me, you know, kind of thing. A navigator would probably have a pretty good list, you know, of, these are the 8 people that want to kill me, if that's the case, you know. But with her, there's just this obliviousness to, you know, the navigating domain, which I thought was realistic, at least.
Something I'd add is that the movie in general has a really kinetic pace. So in the way shots are framed, the way the movie is edited, the length of scenes, just how often action comes in to punctuate. And it made me realize, because I've been rewatching the Iron Man movies and the Avengers movies, and just how often you see that combination in movies, particularly about sevens, particularly transmitting sevens. Comedy and action, perfectly fused. Yeah. So one example that came to mind for that for me is the Blues Brothers. Blues Brothers, you know, centered around 2 sevens, and it's just got so much music and great story and so many jokes, and it ends with one of the greatest car chases ever filmed. And it's comedic, but that doesn't mean it isn't thrilling. And that is very much striving to feel excited writ large. And you see a lot of that in this movie, just in the way it's put together, scripted, directed, designed. It's very bright and colorful. It pops.
Yeah. It's hard, you know, this is an example where it's hard to tease apart the strategy and the instinctual bias, right? Because the transmitting bias and the striving to feel excited are so closely related to each other that with this character, you could take almost anything and say, well, that's the striving to feel excited, or that's the transmitting. Again, I think there's some real clear things like the the sparkle and the incessant talkativeness. I mean, last time we talked about the character in Pride and Prejudice, a navigating 7, very different, right? So there you could see some things are 7, some things are navigating, right? But here it's like, man, it's all just kind of, you know, of the same cloth, really, when it comes down to it. I think that, you know, one of the things for me that was so indicative of that was, you know, even though it wasn't the climactic action scene, the scene in the funhouse, right, where they're, having the battle with all the bad guys, okay, and you know, TJ, you already mentioned going down the slide, but there's that point going down the slide where the huntress kind of stops, jumps on this guy that's following her. It comes out of the slide and she's stabbing him in the chest, and Harley Quinn kind of turns around, looks at her and says, "You are so cool." You know, I mean, just effusive and like, oh my gosh, I mean, how awesome is this chick who's, did this really great move. That battle itself, that fight scene itself, took on a really, really cartoonish aspect, and as I was watching it, I could not help but think of the old Batman series with Adam West and Burt Ward, and and so many great cameos as the villains like Cesar Romero and Roy Burgess and Frank Gorshin and all these people, right? It was just this kind of this campy clownishness, right, that was happening. And even the sledgehammer that you referred to, the giant sledgehammer, it's almost like there's one scene where she hits somebody and it almost seemed like one of those, like hollow kids' little sledgehammers that she hit a guy, and it almost made like a squeaking sound when she hit, and it just brought this sort of cartoonish, aspect to that, although pretty graphic in some scenes, right? Some of the scenes were not graphic at all. It was almost like they were trying to have these battles without actually hurting anybody. And then all of a sudden you'd see something that was like, oh yeah, that was pretty rough, right? Kind of thing. So, that scene for me really, really captured, kind of the essence of this movie, I thought.
Yeah, in some places it feels just the premise itself. This, it's 5 or 6 women in this funhouse just absolutely decimating hundreds of giant masked thugs. Seems a little unrealistic.
Yeah.
But then if you think about it, it's really not, you don't have to suspend disbelief anymore than watching Black Widow from the Marvel movies do the same thing, or frankly Batman doing the same thing. Like,
or John Wick.
Yeah, exactly. If you think too much about it, you've missed the point. The point is just have fun watching these women beat the shit out of all these giant guys.
Yeah. I think this is a movie that invited you from the very outset to not think about it, right? To just sit back, have some fun, enjoy it. Like even you made reference, they're sitting in her apartment and starting to watch TV with a box of, it was Lucky Charms or something, and just kind of, giggling at themselves right before the police come to try and get them.
And of all things they're watching.
Yeah.
And of all things they're watching, Looney Tunes cartoons.
Oh, right.
And she's practically Bugs Bunny herself.
Yes.
Just to lean in a little bit into something we've already been talking about, the difference between transmitting 7 and navigating 7. Our next episode will be about preserving 7. In general, Mary, I wouldn't mind having you pontificate a little about this, about the phenomenon of when, in this case, how transmitting complements 7-ness and how it can be very hard to tease it apart. So it's like a transmitting 7 gets a double dose, as opposed to a navigating 7 or a preserving 7.
Yeah, well, I think so. It absolutely is, and this is what happens with these subtypes, right? So often you get a situation where either the instinctual bias and the strategy are affectively reinforcing each other. Okay, the transmitting 8 is another one. Okay, the preserving 5, where it's just like you get this double dose of something that's very similar. Okay? Other times you get something that's really, not really fitting together as comfortably and creates a more, I don't want to call it a more complicated or nuanced character, but a more, contradictory character in some way. So we could take the transmitting 5 as an example. We could take the navigating 7, like we talked about last time, the navigating 8 in some ways, right? So you've got, kind of this classic 8 of, Sonny Corleone, and you got this other 8 who's clearly an 8, but very different temperament in, Vito, right? And so forth. So, yeah, this is just one of those ones that really, really, really reinforce these things, almost like, say, a preserving 6. Okay, with a preserving 6, you got a whole lot of preserving and a whole lot of 6, and it's hard to mistype that character, right? Because it's just so clear. Preserving 5 would be another one. And again, with the 7. So the way to understand what is what when you're looking at this, okay, how is this character different from Elizabeth in the last movie, right? How are they similar? How are they different? I don't see Elizabeth, stopping to look at the sparkly bag, right? Or dyeing her hair or tattooing herself, setting aside the period or era differences. There are differences here. And that difference, since they're both 7s, that difference explains the impact of the instinctual bias. Did I answer your question? I know I talked a lot. Yeah.
And just to underline something you said, if a character has one of the contradictory expressions, combinations, it's less likely that character is going to immediately pop for an audience member, particularly somebody who's not well-versed in the Enneagram, as being that type. Much easier to mistype. We did an episode a few seasons ago about the Hugh Grant character and about a boy who's a preserving 7. But again, a very different character from Harley Quinn, not just because he doesn't live in a cartoon world and he's not a career criminal, but still, he's much more reserved. He doesn't have that outward and impulsivity that kind of electric nature that we see with a lot of transmitting sevens, although at heart, he is still very much a seven.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that same need for pleasure, that same tendency to reframe, that same sort of, distractibility and fear of commitment that we can see in sevens, sort of exuded through those. And, and despite, it's interesting because I was going to say there's a fear of commitment in Harley Quinn, but there is also that obsessiveness over the Joker, right? So she's clearly somebody who falls in love really hard, but she also kind of abandons people, I mean, she's real close to them for a bit, and then all of a sudden, well, I'll dispose of you. And the contradiction we talk about in sevens, and it's kind of a double whammy with the transmitting seven, is this, kind of need to connect and bond with you versus, and then all of a sudden, you know what, I'm bored, and that looks good too, right? So I always call it the I love you, but she looks good too phenomenon, right? And we see this with Harley, I think. She falls in love with something and is, and then, a bright shiny penny, and off she goes to this new thing. Anything else transmitting that you guys would point to here?
As you mentioned, it is hard to differentiate between what's transmitting and what's transmitting seven, and that is our next heading. So this is something I had under transmitting, but I think it applies to transmitting seven just as easily. Larger than life actions, all of which are impulsive. So we mentioned the hyena. She buys the hyena on a whim. That happens early in the movie. She's heartbroken from being ditched by Mr. J. I can't remember who has a hyena, but just suddenly, I'm taking that.
Yeah. It won out over the hog, right? So the hyena, yeah.
And the hyena, they almost have a what's the word? They bond together. Like he falls in love with her as much as she falls in love with him, and then the guy who sells her the hyena is making advances towards her, so she has the hyena eat him. He's chewing on the guy's leg in the next scene.
Yeah. It's almost it's kind of amusing that I always think of a laughing hyena, right? You laugh like a hyena. So hyenas are associated with this laughing sound, which makes it the perfect pet for a seven in a weird, twisted way.
And this transmitting seven is deadly like hyenas are. If there's any threat lions have, it's from hyenas.
Yes.
Harley is no pushover. Probably the biggest example of a larger-than-life impulsive action she takes in the movie is when she blows up the chemical plant. So that happens early on. She's drunk, and she says, I have the best idea. It just comes to her. She steals a fuel truck while the driver's taking a piss. She rips off the necklace that represents Mr. J, and then drives it right into this gated chemical plant, jumping out at the last minute, and it makes this huge explosion. And only after she's done it does she realize, now people are going to know that we broke up, and now I don't have the protection of being the Joker's girlfriend. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Oh, well.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well. Right.
But she's made an impact. That's very different than just dropping that necklace in the ocean. That is a grand, huge thing. And this is a comic book movie. This is a cartoonish character that originated in a cartoon. Most real-life transmitting sevens would not impulsively blow up a chemical factory to commemorate a breakup.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to say here, not every transmitting seven is quite like Harley Quinn, right? Kind of like we talked about with Sherlock and the transmitting five. We have to say that this is an extreme example of the character, but it's in that extremeness that it becomes really easy to see. But one thing I see in transmitting sevens very often is just this over-the-top excitement about something that others, may not get as excited about, right? Like there's the sandwich, for example, that you made reference to. It's like, it looked like, setting aside the Armenian arm hair, it looked like a tasty sandwich, but for her, it's, oh my God, the world's going to stop, kind of thing. And so transmitting sevens can really, to my view, sometimes overdo the enthusiasm about something, right? And, but to them, it's not. And, often this is kind of what makes them delights to be around, is that excitability and that enthusiasm and that joy that they exude. But it can also feel a bit like a sugar rush, right? It's like, okay, I get it with the sandwich. Get it, let's just take a deep breath here and calm down, right? So, anything else transmitting 7?
While I was watching the raid on the cops' station, which we mentioned before involves glitter bombs and beanbags, after a certain point, the fight takes her into the evidence locker. And that's when she starts using random bits of evidence. Exactly, in my mind, the way Jackie Chan uses props. I've got into Jackie Chan in the 90s, watching Rumble in the Bronx. I'd barely even heard of him. I did not know that his thing was fighting with objects. I'm like, what are the 15 different ways I can use a ski, both offensively and defensively, or a stepladder, or a refrigerator, or a TV, or what have you. So that scene was really reminiscent of that, of like, what are all the riches around us that we can repurpose and use in this fun action way? It's over the top, it's completely unrealistic, and it's a barrel of fun.
Yeah.
My favorite shot of the whole movie is when she's hiding. So the biker gang has come in. She's hiding behind a pallet full of cocaine bags, evidence, right? The bikers are shooting at her. They're exploding the cocaine. You can see the cocaine snow is raining down. She realizes what it is. She gets a big grin on her face. She takes a huge inhale through her nose and then goes on this cocaine-fueled, death rampage against this biker gang. If you think a transmitting 7 is a lot to handle, put them on cocaine and then see what happens.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, some people don't need the drugs, right? So, and look, that was the whole Robin Williams thing too. I mean, he was, notoriously had really, big drug addiction problems, and these things can happen to anybody, right? But for a transmitting 7, sustaining that high that they often get addicted to, and I mean that kind of mental and emotional high, can be really, really tough, right? And so they have to go looking for outside stimulation. It might be shopping, it might be collecting, it might be partying, it might be drugs, whatever. But this can be something that they wrestle with.
Well, you mentioned Robin Williams, so then John Belushi, Chris Farley.
Yeah.
So there's a common pattern here.
Keith Moon from The Who.
Sure.
Died at 31.
Yep.
And he looked a whole lot older.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody who didn't die young, but burned the candle at both ends in the same way, Chico Marx from the Marx Brothers. He was a compulsive gambler his entire life. He was a womanizer to a degree that it's hard to even imagine, and just seemed to enjoy every second of existence. But you're right, as you point out, like the shadow of this is somebody who burns a candle at both ends can burn out early. And there are tragic cases of people who died, unfortunately, really young. And now we don't get to see what the ensuing decades would have brought us from John Belushi or from Chris Farley.
Yeah. This is purely anecdotal, and I'm not a mental health professional, but in my experience, it seems that the type most at risk of depression is 7s, right? I find that a lot of 7s behind the clown mask, for lack of a better word, really battle depression and dissatisfaction in a big way, right? So it's really something that, and there are countless movies and stories and books and plays about this phenomenon, about the sad clown, or the disaffected clown in some way. So.
One more transmitting 7 I'll mention is that Harley is very much a trickster figure. And there's an archetype of 7s that I've named the wild card. So one of the things that she does that it's not unusual to see 7s do this in a movie, is she breaks the fourth wall. She, not only in voiceover, but sometimes, and right at the very end, she looks right at the camera and winks. And John Belushi's character does that in one scene in Animal House. And Ferris Bueller does that throughout Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And Deadpool does that in all the Deadpool movies. There's this collusion of like, I see you, you see me, and isn't this a fun ride we're on? Isn't this great? And get a load of this guy. Can you believe this guy's taking all this too seriously? Shake him up. Let's have some fun. And there's a scene when she's subverting the genre trope. She's tied to a chair. The Ewan McGregor character is monologuing at her like a villain, and she keeps interrupting him with what he's about to say. It's like she's very aware of like what the tropes are, even though she lives in the reality of it. She can also stand outside of it, like Bugs Bunny, and comment on it.
Yeah. And it's that kind of breaking of the fourth wall has kind of seductive quality to it, right? It's like I'm taking this extra step to draw you in, right? To take a moment out and, transmit directly to you in a way so that I kind of suck you in and seduce you. So, it's almost like I've got too much of this need to get your attention almost and connect to you and inspire you in the same way that I want to be inspired, that I need to break the rules to do it, right? Or the conventions at least.
And why be bound by rules that impede your fun?
Yeah, absolutely. There was also one more Transmitting 7 thing that I kind of caught, and then we'll move on. Her business card, right? As she's kind of creating the business card through the movie and kept like handwriting things on. So it was like Harley Quinn. I wrote them down here, but it was like dog walker, therapist, bounty hunter, kind of thing. It's like,
mercenary.
I'm just going to do it all. Yeah, mercenary, right? And she just settled on, what was it, badass motherfucker or something at the end as her job title. So, all right. So before we talk about other Transmitting 7s, what would this movie have been like with a Navigating 7?
Well...
Other than boring.
Yeah, not as much fun is what I was going to say.
I think the character would have been a lot more calculating, a lot more aware of just the ecosystem of the criminals and who's aligned with who. And because the inciting incident is that she loses her protection from being the Joker's girlfriend, she would be a lot more proactive about like, okay, who can I find an alliance with? Whereas the alliance that she finds drops into her lap. I also think a Navigating 7 at the end would have joined the Birds of Prey. It's like, here's this alliance of kick-ass, outsider women. We just all work together to take down the bad guys against overwhelming odds, and let's keep this going, as opposed to what Harley does, which is like, bye-bye. That was fun. I'm gone.
Yeah. TJ Ingrassia, what would a Preserving 7 have looked like here? Any thoughts?
Pretty much any action that Harley took in this movie, just have her do the opposite of that thing, and that would be closer to what a Preserving 7 would do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, again, the Preserving 7, it's still a 7, but much more controlled, much more of a need for structure. I've seen a lot of times where a Preserving 7 gets misidentified as a 1. Right, particularly because of their need for stability, security, and things to be just so, especially in the nest. Right, and clearly, Harley Quinn was not particularly anal about her nest. Right, kind of thing. So, it would have. You're right. It would have just been a much. Again, we go back to the Hugh Grant character in Something About a Boy. The guy didn't want to leave his house, most of the time, right? So, not Harley Quinn at all.
I think she might have just fled town when her protection dried up. Of like, I'm legitimately not safe in Gotham City, even though it's where I live.
Right.
All my connections are here. Let's see what Japan's like.
That's right. Yeah. All right. So let's see here. So let's talk about other Transmitting 7s and other roles. I'll tell you what.
Or do we want to talk about other characters in this movie or Transmitting 7?
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. No, let's talk about other characters in this movie before we move on. So thoughts on other characters?
Well, it's not so much as character type, although I'm sure we'll get into this. What accent does Ewan McGregor think he is doing in this movie? Might be on the Mount Rushmore of worst movie accents of all time.
Yeah. There's on the podcast, The Rewatchables, which I'm a big fan of, there's a category called the Judd Nelson, what movie are you in, sort of character. And I kind of felt that way about Ewan McGregor. It's like, he seems to be doing his own thing here. I don't know. TJ, what do you think about that?
About his accent or about his performance in general?
About the accent, but the performance in general. Any thoughts?
Well, just to jump to what he's literally one of the only supporting characters that I would have at least some confidence venturing a guess at his type, and the type that I think for him is 7. There's a number of scenes when he's trying to bring up the mood because he's down, so he wants everybody in the bar to have a good time. He can get really punitive. You can see a lot of the unhealthy one coming out of him when he's angry, and now suddenly he can't abide somebody having fun. He strings up one of his rivals upside down, and then as he taunts him, says, "Woo, who's having a good time? You are." Like there's this pretense of it being fun. He's kind of an evil clown, maybe somewhat jokerish. So I don't know enough about him personally, but I've seen him show up on other people's lists as an actor, just as a person, as a 7. I can't honestly think of too many things I've seen him in where it's like I would recommend that as a 7. Although he did do like a docuseries where he's riding a motorcycle across Central Europe. Like a lot of long-distance travel.
Yeah, and Train Spotting, too, was kind of a 7-ish character in that. Which I don't know him, I'm not a big follower of Ewan McGregor, so I couldn't say. There was also in that same scene where he's hanging the guy upside down and cutting his face off, he's going to let the girl go, right? And then, he realizes that she has a snot bubble coming out of his mouth, and he's just so, just like, oh, how disgusting, kind of thing, and, ends up killing her as well. So
again, a very impulsive choice.
Exactly right, and just you ruined my good moment here by having a bubble of snot sticking out of your nose, and so you're going to pay the price of having your face cut off, kind of thing. Yeah. So, how about I don't know, any other characters stand out for a type?
It's a minor character, but the Ewan McGregor character's henchman is Victor Zaz, played by Chris Messina. I got a pretty strong 8-ish vibe from him. He's got kind of a steady 8-ness. And it's not unusual to see an 8 in that kind of supporting role of like chief thug to a criminal.
Yeah, and he's got a sadistic streak to him as well that you kind of see in an unhealthy 8. I mean, he seemed to enjoy his work a bit too much, right? So, how about the Rosie Perez character? Any thoughts on her?
My best guess would be a 6, and that's a very tenuous guess. Yeah. She's very much a loyal soldier. She's committed to taking down this gangster in spite of the sexism in her workplace and the credit for a previous case that's been taken away from her. She gets taken off the case, but keeps investigating it on her own, even though her badge and gun have been taken away. So that seemed pretty 6-ish to me, although she's a supporting character, so it's not like we get a full picture of what her life is like.
Yeah. And a kind of cartoonish supporting character. I mean, there's even a joke about how she talks like a cop out of an 80s movie, right? And so her dialogue is very cliched and pointed out as cliched. Hard for me to get a feel for many of the characters in this in that way. So, other transmitting 7s. TJ Ingrassia, let's hear from you. Other examples of transmitting 7s.
So we talked about Jack Black in pretty much anything. School of Rock is a great example. Will Ferrell in Elf. Jim Carrey in a lot of stuff, but especially, if we're sticking with sort of the cartoonish comic book theme, Jim Carrey as the Mask in The Mask is a great example. In previous episodes, we talked about Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark in the Iron Man movies, Avengers movies. And then my personal favorite, Adam Driver in the movie What If, which is the film based on the stage play written by our very own TJ Dawe.
That's
Hello,
right.
world.
Which I have not seen yet, and I'm going to go out and see that. Where is that available, TJ? Is that?
I just bought the Blu-ray. I'm sure you can stream it, wherever you get It was released in Canada, I think, as The F Word, but in the States they retitled it What If. And Adam Driver plays a really good... Harley Quinn is a very exaggerated, cartoonish version of the Transmitting Seven. I think Adam Driver in this film and his eventual wife in the film, they play very realistic, more real life. I mean, even still exaggerated, but much more real life, identifiable Transmitting Sevens.
Yeah, you're right. That movie doesn't have any kind of exaggerations of reality in it. So, yeah, I think that's a really fair assessment. As somebody who created the role. I didn't, by the way. In the stage play, that character is referenced and we never meet him. The stage play has the two leads as characters and that's it. And somebody else wrote the screenplay. So Ilan Mastai deserves the credit for that. And who knows, maybe Adam Driver created a lot of that, brought a lot of that energy to it. Although he's not always a Transmitting Seven in his screen roles, in his many, many screen roles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Patterson, for example, he's probably kind of a nine-ish character.
Great nine.
Than that, yeah. So, TJ Dawe, any other Transmitting Sevens you would?
I got a few, yeah. So Ava Coleman, played by Janelle James on Abbott Elementary, she kind of dips in between real and not real because she's a grade school principal, and yet she's got all these side hustles. And she just seems to have, again, almost a Bugs Bunny-ish relationship with reality. She can just make anything happen and knows all these celebrities and all of that. Tracy Morgan playing Tracy Jordan on 30 Rock. Again, very impulsive, very quick. The genie in Aladdin and most roles Robin Williams has played, especially when they leverage his ability to improvise on set. Mozart, Tom Hulce in Amadeus. Beetlejuice, BoJack Horseman. We've already mentioned Deadpool and John Blutarsky, played by John Belushi in Animal House. And Pee Wee Herman in Pee-wee's Big Adventure and otherwise.
Yeah. Those are great. And the Pee Wee Herman, that's a great one. I had forgotten about that, and I just think that such a creative show and a creative character, and really anybody not familiar with Pee-wee's Playhouse or Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I just think Pee-wee's Big Adventure is such a delightful Transmitting Seven movie, and it speaks to the childlike nature of the seven and how they can just have this innocence and this joyfulness that just makes everybody around them feel better. So Pee-wee was a good example of that, even if the reality of Pee-wee was a little bit different, but that's another story. So, let's see here. I've got a couple of additions here. I don't know if we mentioned Eddie Murphy as the donkey and, pretty much in Shrek and almost everything else he's done. I do want to recommend I think it's on Netflix, the documentary about Eddie Murphy, which is really, really well done. But what I like about it in particular is it shows him at home and how the public persona of sevens in general, particularly the Transmitting Seven, is very different from the home reality of the Transmitting Seven, where they're just kind of in their cocoon, chilling out, relaxing, just like everybody else. Okay, it's when they feel the need to, go out into the world and do these other things that you see that. Cameron Diaz in almost everything she's in, particularly Something About Mary. In one of my favorite movies, Lost in Translation, Anna Faris plays a slightly fictionalized version of Cameron Diaz. That's a great example of a Transmitting Seven. Oh my gosh, I stink so bad, kind of thing. Let's see, Enora, which we did in a earlier podcast, the Mikey Madison character. Sam Malone from Cheers. Now, this is a real throwback. Youngins, if you have not watched the TV series Cheers, it's gold. Go back and watch it. Sam Malone's a great Transmitting Seven character. And another deep cut throwback here, Jeff Spicoli, played by Sean Penn in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Great Transmitting Seven. Okay, guys, final thoughts before we wrap up on the Transmitting Seven.
This episode was a lot of fun.
And if anybody listening hasn't seen it, not only do I recommend this movie, but I recommend The Suicide Squad, which is distinct from Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad was written and directed by James Gunn, who did the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and all of them have a very similar energy of like, let's take something fantastical, let's make it accessible and fun and not take itself too seriously.
I'm a big fan of that movie for lots of reasons, and I was really, really looking forward to doing a little sidebar here on the Jim Carroll song "People Who Died" that runs over the credits of the Suicide Squad. So that will have to wait for another opportunity, folks. Hey, guys, thanks as always. This was great, a lot of fun, and listeners, we will see you next time.